Hello and welcome to KennyRoy.com. I'm Kenny Roy. This is the Ask Videomail for September 16th, 2013. Welcome to the site to you new members and welcome back to the old. The Ask Videomail is your chance to get your question, character animation, or performance answered in a video just like this one, but I need your questions if I'm going to answer them. So please send the questions to webmaster@kennyroy.com. I go through all the questions and I answer the ones that I think will help the most people. There is no such thing as a stupid question, and it is the best way to get the most out of this site. Man, things are getting exciting. Anim Gym is coming. Anim Gym is on its way. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, check out the announcement. That is on the homepage of KennyRoy.com. And follow me on Facebook and Twitter for more information about that. But I think it's going to be fantastic. The first one is going to be starting in October. And just get ready. Get excited. Are you stoked? Get stoked. All right. No other news to report, so I think this week we'll just jump right into the question. It's a goodie. Well, thank you for sending in that awesome question. It's funny, when you first start out at a studio, they kind of give you free rein to do almost anything you can get away with. I was never really told. In fact, to be totally honest with you, right when I started, like almost 15 years ago, no one told me that there was such thing as cheating. I didn't really. It never dawned on me to cheat, and I think it's because I had never really worked with a camera before. I was just working. I was working in CG, but I had sort of always done everything, orbiting around and making sure everything kind of worked just like perfectly from all angles, even though that's impossible. I answered an Ask Videomail about that, very, very same thing a few weeks ago. But yeah, so it never even dawned on me that I could cheat. And then, once this concept started to pervade my work, I realized that I was probably cheating too much. And lo and behold, what will happen is if you're going a little too far, you will be reeled in. There will be someone either who is further down the pipeline from you, or maybe your supervisor, who is just saying, you cheated this too much. You need to kind of like bring this back to reality. And sometimes it'll be an artistic thing that they're pointing out. Sometimes it'll be a technical thing they're pointing out. So what I did is I made just a little list of things that have to do with cheating. It's basically always, things that you always cheat, things that you sometimes cheat, and things that you never cheat. Okay, so let's start with the always. Okay, and by the way, cheating doesn't just necessarily mean, I wanted to clarify this right up front. In theater, cheating always meant basically just turning a little bit more towards the audience. Even if you're talking with someone right here, you cheat out. Okay, now that's a very simplified way of expressing this, but it's the exact same thing in CG animation. Instead of just normally meaning that we just open up to the audience, it can be just opening up to the audience, but it also means making it so that something is posed or positioned in a way that is making the shot read to camera. Not necessarily just like turning it towards camera, but posing or positioning something in a way that makes it read through camera better than it is in 3D from all angles, and sometimes at the expense of actually breaking something in 3D. Okay, so we'll talk about that. So let's talk about, so it's not just side to side. Sometimes it's up and down, and sometimes it has to do with like stretching the body and stretching limbs and positioning limbs and all that stuff. Okay, always facial poses. Always cheat facial poses, and that's more along the lines of the traditional definition, like the theater definition of the word cheat. Facial poses should always be a little bit more sort of angled to camera, a little bit more so that they're not symmetrical and straight, flat across. If you have a character smiling, this is boring, but if you bring that corner a little bit higher on the camera side, it always reads a little bit clearer. It always makes it feel like the face has some interest in it, and also it's not so damn boring to look at. Okay, so always cheat facial poses. That goes for eye lines as well. One of the things with eye lines, and I've said this in a video mail before, but when you have a head turned totally profile, and somebody and the eyes, if you blow my eye up to be really big, it's like a globe right here. The iris is almost disappearing around the horizon of my eyeball right now. So really, kind of where I'm looking over here is kind of hard to tell. But if you actually bring the body back a little bit and bring the head and then push the eyes over, then it actually feels more like I'm looking in this direction than if my head is in this direction. It's a very weird cheat, but eye lines as well need to be cheated. Okay, now that also means that sometimes if you have a character that is looking in a direction that's too far this way and you couldn't actually comfortably get their eyes all the way back over to where they're supposed to be looking, you can cheat. You can cheat them and just position them in the corners so that they are, maybe this direction, and someone who's standing over here, it will look like the audience will kind of like bridge the gap there. Okay, so cheating eye lines. Facial poses also includes eyebrows. When you have that facial pose, like I said, like if you have a pose like this where one eyebrow is up, you wouldn't do this pose where the up eyebrow is away from camera, right? Because it's very hard to read. The eyebrow disappears around the horizon of my brow bone really quickly, and on this side we just kind of get the angry eye. Whereas if we have this, then all we need is that corner of this eyebrow to really read that it's this shape, and then on this side we have the visually interesting eyebrow. Okay, so that's the facial poses. Always, that goes in the always column. Contrapposto poses. This is what contrapposto means. Contrapposto is when you have your shoulders and your hips counterposed. That's what it means, actually. It's the definition, right? And so if you're leaning on one hip, right, you normally work the body this way. It is less interesting to see this, the crunched up side, than it is to see actually the stretched side. Okay, and what is nice to do is you can actually get a little bit of silhouette by working that negative space with the elbow. Okay, right. This side, the crunched up side, is actually not very interesting to see. I'll back up a little bit. Right. This side is actually a little bit more interesting. Right, that long stretch, that nice long silhouette. We in general, I mean, this is like a figure drawing term. In general, we want to see the longer shapes, right? We want to draw with long strokes. We want to see those long shapes. The contrapposto just doesn't look good when you have the character kind of just like crunch over towards you. Okay, so contrapposto, lip sync with open mouth shapes. Okay. This is another one. When you have a jaw open, we kind of read the volume of an open mouth shape in the body more than we do the mouth, but a little bit of it comes from the mouth. So if you're completely in profile, sometimes it's a good idea to actually just bring the jaw over and open it up a little bit towards camera. So you read that open mouth shape. So here's straight, and then I'll move it over. Right? So in that open mouth shape so that we can just kind of match what we're hearing to what we're seeing. Okay? Also, really applies when you have a character with their head up or with their head down. You have to cheat the openness of that mouth, especially when the head's down, because the jaw opens, it hinges basically away from camera. A very open mouth shape, looking downwards. See how it just shrinks? You see that? So you have to go way overboard, or even sometimes you can maybe just translate the jaw a little bit, or cheat the timing of that open mouth shape so that it goes into that open mouth shape before the character's head goes down. And then, fine, if he's going here and he's screaming downwards or whatever, at least we started to see that big open mouth shape before the character, before it disappeared or it shrunk like that. You understand? So that's the deal with the open mouth shapes in terms of lip sync. Okay, limbs that's in the always column. These are still all in the always column. Limbs that are being foreshortened. Okay, if you're losing a lot of your limb in foreshortening, okay, even if it's part of a gesture where it's really exactly what you wanted for the gesture. If you have a frame where everything is being completely lost in foreshortening, sometimes it's good to just cheat it out just a little bit so you have just a little bit of perspective. All right, make that cheat work with the rest of the gesture, but you don't ever want to really. I mean, this is not a very good pose. It's funny. I had this moment when I was a little kid. I used to get out my comic books and I get a big piece of paper and I was just start copying the poses that I thought were really, really cool. And I actually did some covers that I sent into Wizard magazine. And when I was like 10 years old, and they actually published them in the magazine. I was so excited. But at any rate, when I was doing that, I realized that drawing a foreshortened arm was the hard arm, like this. Like I had no idea, there's got to be a muscle there. So I would draw like these big muscles in the way. And then I realized that a lot of the comic books and the comic cards, I had comic book cards too that I used to copy. I particularly remember, was it maybe the Sentinel card from X-Men and Boomer? Not Boomer. Is Boomer one of those? Jubilee. I think it was Jubilee. The card was the person with their hand like this, and like energy was coming out. And I'm like, oh my God, that's brilliant. Because look, the arm is completely covered. You see that? You don't have to draw any of the arm. So I would draw these characters, like in this pose, and then I would just draw a hand right here, right? I'm not going to raise my hand so that you're actually getting the impression, but I would draw this, and then I would draw a gigantic hand right here, right? Covering the whole arm like this. I'm like, yes, I don't have to draw foreshortened arms ever again. Anyway, so that's not good for animation. Another story about that in production was on Garfield. Our animation director would constantly remind us that the tail, especially when we're staring right at Garfield, the tail is getting lost in like almost all poses in foreshortening. When it's kind of like flapping behind him, we had to keep it nice and straight up, so and not down like a real cat's tail. Actually, cats' tails do stick straight up when they're running and when they're walking. Like across the fence, you see that cat tail in the air. But when he's sitting down, we were always reminded, you got to get that tail up so that we're not losing it all on the ground like that. So anything that is being foreshortened. And that's in the always column, another one in the always column. And the last one that I could think of in the always column is cheating across the cut to maintain fluidity. Okay? So, for instance, if you have a character that's punching and you cut right here, well, look at the distance between, in screen space, 2D here, look at the distance between my hand and and my jaw, the side of my jaw, right? If you cut to another angle, all right, and it's like somewhere right here, okay? I didn't change it just now. This is where it is. I'm keeping everything nice and locked. But look where it is. This is actually like something that is going to really throw the audience. It's going to look like I was about to punch, and then I brought it all the way back here. Why? Because even though it's nice and locked, it feels further back than it just was. So across the cut, I would want to create that same distance, right? I would cheat this out here, okay? And maybe bring it a little bit forward and then finish that motion. Do you see that? All right, so across the cut, anything across the cut. Sometimes it's just the pose of the character that's like sitting. If they're like leaned on their knees and their knees are spread, and one of them is sort of being foreshortened, and then you cut to like a front angle, and their legs like look like they're like totally apart, you got to bring them in, right? Because in the side view, here are the knees. Here's the, here's my body, and it goes out to the knee, and then the calves go down here, right? Like this, right? And they're spread, right? If this is your first shot, you see that? See how you can't really tell how far apart they are? And then you cut to the front view. Probably have to bring them in so it's not such a stark difference. You see that? All right, so that's in the always column. All right, so let's go over the sometimes cheat, okay? Sometimes you want to cheat the body, the overall body pose for a nice reversal, okay? And this also has to do with foreshortening, okay? So if I'm going from this side, the contrapposto, to this side, all right, see what I just did there? I actually turned it a little bit. Why? Because we're getting a little bit of an impression of a C shape this way. But if I go like this, we actually don't really actually get that reversal, right? So we go from this side, yeah, blah, 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 blah. But I actually cheat that. I almost make it a turn outwards and backwards so that we get that nice reversal, okay? Anytime you do a major pose change, it's great if you can get a reversal in that spine, right? In that body, right? Or wherever it is. If it's through the body, toe to tip of your finger, wherever that is, wherever you're trying to go for that, you need to know that it can be stronger if you cheat it sometimes. Another thing to just remember is I do this example a lot. Look at this pose change, right? Look at my hand. My hand is probably the most prominent shape that's going on, but what is it actually doing in 2D, in like screen space? It's scaling. It's not pose change at all. It's just scaling. You see that? It's just getting bigger and smaller. This is the exact same distance that I was just moving it, but it's actually a pose change now, right? So that's the exact same thing. If you have a character that is going through the pose change, you've got to cheat it. Sometimes, this is in the sometimes column. Sometimes, not you got to. Sometimes cheat it so that you get a little bit more of something that feels like a pose change, right? Not just scaling, all right? Like this, okay? Another sometimes, cheating the body, and this is just theatrical, cheating the body out, but you have to watch body language. Body language is the foundation. It's what we build our performance on top of. Okay, your subtlety is built upon really strong body language. So if you're trying to make somebody feel like they're like trying to intimidate someone, well then they need to be right at them. They need to be almost leaned forward. Right? So in that shot, it wouldn't be a good idea to back them off, open them up to camera, and blah, blah, blah. That wouldn't work, right? Sometimes. It might work if you cheat them out, but then lean them back in and really kind of like get that aggressive pose back towards that person they're trying to intimidate. So again, it's a sometimes kind of thing, okay? Sometimes you can cheat legs that are off screen that don't need to be animated. If you don't have to animate them, then you can not animate them. Also, sometimes you can cheat the distance that the character is to the ground. I always recommend that if you're doing a character that has a weight shift and you can't see their legs, right now I'm on the ground. Why? Because when I do this, our brains are absolutely unbelievably powerful processors for recognizing, physical things that happen in our world, even through video. You can tell that I'm standing on the ground. Why? Because there is just like the plausible pivot points, the plausible weight shifts. You know that I'm going to rise and then go back down as I dip into my hips. You know I'm standing on the ground. You can feel it. This is a very hard impression to give in CG because people they try to rotate their characters a lot, especially when they're sitting down. Just this kind of like freedom of movement is very hard to do without having your feet on the ground. That's why I recommend that you do actually plant the feet on the ground when you're animating a character, even from like the waist up. But you can cheat it if you can really get into the physicality of that scene and animate what would be really accurate sort of feet planted movement in the torso. So you sometimes can cheat that. Detailed contact, sometimes you can cheat by covering it, okay? So, for instance, someone has their elbow resting on something like this, right? Well, you don't actually have to have it resting this point of contact right here. You can maybe pick a point of contact that's a little bit higher up, right? And then just put it in front of where it's supposed to be touching, thereby making it so that, yeah, it's touching back here, and that's where that pivot point is supposed to be, but it's actually intersecting. And I'm just doing my very best, but you can't even tell that it's intersecting. It doesn't matter because you're covering it up. Because the arm is actually a little bit in front of where that contact point is. Or alternatively, if you want it to be on this point, you can cover it up with the arm. Just like this. You see that? Here's the contact point, but if I cover it up with the arm like this, you'll never know if it's penetrating or slipping just a little bit if I just put it up there, right? You'd be surprised how many animations I see where somebody is trying to, it's almost like showcase their contact of something like really complex and detailed. And that's great and all. You should be able to do that if it is required of you in a shot. But if your acting is suffering, but that elbow is like, you're showing that you can keep that elbow perfectly on that corner, you know, as you're moving your arm, you're not really going to impress anybody. So cheat that stuff sometimes. And always, and this is a way to determine if the case you're working on right now is a sometimes or not, when you don't have to animate the cheat, okay? So if you have like stretch controls that you would have to, if you want to cheat something, like him reaching for something, and you'd have to animate, if it's not a cartoony shot, you'd have to animate that stretch, probably should not cheat that. Probably should, you know, make it so that his body leans forward more and he actually gets a little bit of more room so he can reach that thing, okay? Not actually stretch the arm and whatever. So if you're ever finding yourself setting keys on controllers that you're using to cheat something, ask yourself if it's going to be visible to the audience. If it is, then no, you can't do it. So that's why it's sometimes, okay? And now it's never. Now is a never column. I couldn't really think of very many nevers. One is when shadows, fur, cloth, or other simulations are involved. This happens a lot in feature film where you have something that needs to be animated or needs to be a certain way or needs to be accurate in order for the other simulations to work. For instance, that example that I just gave where the person is stretching, you can't stretch the cloth. So immediately, once they reach and the audience sees that their wrist is sticking out, 2 feet past the end of their shirt, then it'll be obvious that you stretch the arm and it won't work. Shadows, like I said, animating those off-screen limbs and stuff like that. If your character is casting a shadow backwards into scene, and they're going like this, but the legs are just like staying completely still, then the shadow will give that away. For any other thing that is going to react to the position or the skin, we couldn't do a lot of cheating on King Kong. We could do a little bit, but we couldn't do really anything that involved cheating the shoulders at all, because in this range around here, he had huge amounts of problems with the fur like freaking out when it started pinching up. Okay. Also in the never column is games. Very, very rarely can you cheat in games because like if you're doing the run cycle that's staring at the back of the main character, yeah, maybe the hands in the run cycle, right? Maybe those don't need to be absolutely like vertex accurate. Holding the gun or whatever. Probably they do though. So, but anyway, it's so rare that you can cheat in games that it's in the never column just by default, okay? And then the last never is whenever it requires to use your animation controls, most of your animation controls to maintain the cheat. Meaning you shouldn't be doing a lot of like modeling and like shaping of your character using animation controls, okay? The reason we don't want to do it when we cheat in this instance is because then the animation controls start behaving very, very weirdly. If you're cheating the length of the character's spine and they're bent over, okay, then all of a sudden that FK controller in the spine that's lower down is actually kind of moving more. You understand? Because it's further out. So like just in, like the law of like fulcrums, it's going to be just like more movement. So you're going to have to do a lot of weird things to try to keep that kind of motion under control. It's going to become very cumbersome to keep track of like what animation control is being used to, you know, make this stretch or cover this thing up or whatever. So hopefully if you can talk to your riggers, or if you have a rigger at your company, or if you're rigging yourself, you've built in some controls like stretch and whatever that take care of those kinds of things. But if you have a rig, or you come to a moment where you're like, oh my God, I've used 25 of my 50 controls on this character just to put him into this pose, and now he needs to move, now he needs to like animate in this position. It's like, I don't have any controls that I can move anymore because I use them all to position him like this. And how am I going to make him like move without everything looking like weird and like rotating from weird pivot points and stuff like that? So that's in the never column. Okay, cool. So I hope this was good information for you. I certainly would have liked this before I started at my first job. Maybe go through your work, maybe check out places where you've cheated and where you can cheat on stuff that you're working on right now. I'd love to see it. Post your stuff, maybe tag me on your work on Facebook, your animation work. And I don't know, I'd love to see what you guys are working on. It's been a pleasure. Please send more questions to webmaster@kennyroy.com. I'd love to see some more of those. Hope this was a good video for you guys. A lot more coming. You know how it is here. Good luck with your animation. As always, rock on.